She had a son whose laugh in the hallway made junior staff smile because it sounded like responsibility could be carried without turning a person dour. Once, she walked the building after hours to collect a file she had left in a conference room, and tiredness softened the edges of her face in the way that makes beauty look less like a mission and more like a memory. She passed a man mopping. He said, "Good evening, Ma," without looking up, as if her face were the sun, and he was someone who must not stare directly at it. Something in his voice snagged her thoughts like a sweater catching on a nail. She slowed. She didn't look back. She took the file and left. In the morning, the thought had unraveled itself into nothing. Zeno practiced stillness hard. He did not always succeed. Some nights he lingered near the high portrait and squinted at the plaque and could not help the half-formed thought that pressed against his ribs like a door you wedge a shoulder against. Could that be? No, keep moving. You're sweeping, not excavating. Rain arrived one evening as if someone had decided to pour a new sky on top of the old one. The workers in the building thinned out early. The guard at the front desk told Zeno not to rush and handed him a cheap plastic poncho with the air of a man offering an expensive gift. Zeno smiled and said thanks and returned to the top floor, because clean floors put a grip under his feet that his mind could use. The wind made the glass ping once like a tiny bell. Then there was a crash. Not of glass, not of weather, but the humankind that tells the body to run. He did not run well. His legs remembered different kinds of running, but he ran. An office door stood ajar, and papers lay on the carpet like white fish pulled out of water and thrown onto a deck. A young man lay on his side on the floor making the sound that men make when pride is trying to keep pain from leaving the mouth. Zeno crouched. The face was pale, lips the wrong color. The breath was short and stubborn. The eyes flickered and tried to focus on a person whose outline said helper. "Easy," Zeno heard himself say, and the sound came out steady, as if someone else with more practice had said it. "You're going to be all right." He didn't think, he lifted. The body in his arms weighed what bodies weigh when they're pretending not to be heavy out of politeness. He took the stairs with a caution that looked like speed. The elevator breathed out and refused to help. The security guard shouted something into a walkie-talkie and sprinted to call for a car. The rain did its work on the windshield, and the siren did its work on the city, and the hospital did its work on a boy whose life had been lived at a pace where all the little signals go unnoticed until there's a big one. In the room with green curtains and a soft machine hum, a nurse's voice sharpened. "Family?" Zeno opened his mouth and found that the word he pulled out did not lie as easily as bribes lie. It had to be dragged. He dragged it. "Yes," he said. "I'm family." "What relation?" He hesitated for an instant and then picked a word up like a stone he knew he had to carry. "Father." The nurse didn't blink. "We'll need to test you." "Do what you have to," he replied. "Just save him." He sent messages into a phone that asked nothing and gave back a clock. He dialed a number he had no right to dial and spoke into the salt-bleached space between breaths. He left a voice message that started with, "I'm sorry to call," and then got lost on its way to the second sentence. He apologized to the ceiling for bothering the nurse when she interrupted his apology to ask him to sign a form. He let people in white coats talk over his head and through him, and then directly to him when he said, "I'll do whatever it takes." Hours passed with the kind of slowness that only hospitals have the budget for. A nurse returned with a face that said, "If you like miracles, you'll like this." "You're a match," she said. Zeno closed his eyes. Every mistake he had ever stacked inside himself slid off a shelf and landed at his feet with a messy series of thuds. He nodded. The decision stood there in front of him like a clear doorway. He moved through it. In the wash of pre-op light, he thought of his mother sitting in a small room at Irene's house, drinking tea like medicine, watching news anchors talk about markets and weather, now that they had stopped talking about her. He thought of Naomi's hand the first time it did not retreat. He thought of boys in cars, music too loud, laughter like knives. He thought of a gate closing on a girl's last sentence. He thought of a portrait in a hallway, and how some frames are not for pictures, but for truths. Grown too big to hold in the hand, he woke to pain that was clear and necessary. A ribbon he had tied around his abdomen to remind himself that something good had been done. He turned his head very slowly and saw the outline of another bed, separated from his by a curtain. He slept, then woke again to the sound of a woman, crying the kind of cry that comes out of a person like wet stone being broken. He didn't speak. The curtain made them strangers. The air made them kin. In the morning, the curtain moved. She stepped in like a person stepping back into a room she had hated and missed. For a second, the woman did not see him as anything but a shape. Then she did, and her hand went to her mouth. And the past, the crowded past, tried to fit into that small ward and failed, spilling memories onto the floor like coins. "You," she began. "I couldn't let him die," he said. And his voice rolled the words gently into the space between them. The machines went on doing their machine noises. A nurse wrote something on a chart with a soft, boring pen. Outside, the hospital did its afternoon stretch. Inside, the woman remembered her own face when it was beautiful and unafraid, and remembered walking out into sunlight that hurt because it saw everything. "Thank you," she said. And the words were old words, but they felt new in her mouth, like shoes that don't blister. He nodded. He had practiced silence for years. He did not break that practice now. He just breathed. For a very long moment, they were two people who had never learned how to exist in the same room without a fight, and were now being taught by machines that beep in steady rhythms. Here is how you stay alive. Here is how you exist without destroying what you touch. He slept again. In the evening, the building he cleaned cleared its throat and sent home the last of its people. The portrait upstairs hung there in the dim, emergency lighting like a star pretending to be a light bulb. The cleaner assigned to cover Zeno's shift that night pushed a mop into the hallway and looked up briefly at the faces in the frame and wondered why the young man looked familiar. Then she shrugged and got back to work. Across the city, Adesua, in Irene's spare room, put her book down and stared at nothing. The text on the page had been a paragraph about forgiveness, and she'd felt irritated at its tone, at the way people speak from mountaintops as if they did not know anything about the patience required to climb. Her phone blinked with missed calls. She didn't see them. She rubbed her thumb along the edge of the book and thought of a kitchen. Years ago, and the sound a hand makes when it meets a cheek. When she finally looked at the screen and saw the number, her stomach shrank the way a thing shrinks when exposed to cold. She called back and spoke into the small electric hole. "What happened? Is he?" And the voice on the other end was professional and clear and said words like failure and donor and stable now, and you should come. She went. She ran. She did not feel the distance because there wasn't any. As she had been running toward this room for 10 years, she stepped inside and saw him, thinner than pride, brow damp, more beautiful in weakness than he had ever been in strength. A nurse explained something about creatinine, levels with a kindness that felt like a blanket. Adesua nodded like someone being instructed on how to breathe. Then the nurse pointed across the way to another bed and said, "He did it. He matched." He said yes. Adesua crossed the room, and the years before she reached the bed, she saw the face she had forced herself not to picture for decades, because to picture, it would be to picture what she had become because of him. She saw the line of the jaw that had made her believe she could survive love without being soft. She saw the scar peeking from the dressing, like truth caught in the door of a closing story. He opened his eyes, and the room, already full, found space for something else. "You saved him," she said. And the words were so simple they felt like a miracle. "He's my son," he replied. "He's ours." Her throat tightened on a sound that belonged in private. She swallowed it because learning new habits takes time. She reached toward him and then stopped, because boundaries had arrived in their lives not as rules, but as contrition, and contrition moves slowly. He understood the pause and nodded, a tiny bow, as if they were still people who know what etiquette is for. She let her fingers rest lightly at the edge of the blanket, and then lifted them again. A touch not given, because sometimes not touching is a bigger kindness. He slept, she did not. She sat between the two beds with her back straight, and her palms on her knees like a woman in a photograph, taken to prove that people can sit with the consequences of their choices and not go mad. The machines purred. Somewhere far away, a television told a joke to a room that did not laugh. Morning took its time. When it arrived, it found the young man, Aaron, the name that now hung around the ward like a soft flag, awake and watching the ceiling, with the carefulness of someone who knows that if you move too quickly, the pain remembers its job and returns to it with enthusiasm. He turned his head. He saw his mother's shoulders. He saw the man in the other bed and the shadow of the dressing, and the drain that meant something important. The world rearranged itself into a new map. He closed his eyes and opened them again to check that the map still held. It did. He asked for water. He drank slowly. He looked at the other bed. He said nothing for a long time, because sometimes the most honest thing in the world is the silence between the decision to speak and the words that finally arrive. "Thank you," he said at last. "You're welcome," Zena whispered. And the words reached him like a rope to hold, not like a verdict to drag. Days folded themselves into a routine that felt like training for a race. No one had asked to run. He healed faster than pride and slower than fear. She came every morning and learned the names of nurses the way she had once, learned the names of investors. He slept, woke, joked once, badly, and was disappointed but also pleased by how flat the joke fell, because it meant this was not a movie. This was a day. When Zeno returned to work, he returned to a new job, because there are managers who watch and remember, and one of them had watched him carry a boy downstairs and remembered standing in a stairwell 4 years earlier with a mother and a bag of small groceries and a choice. People say the city has no memory. People are wrong. The city has 1,000,000 small memories in ordinary bodies. They gave him a set of keys that opened doors he had once walked past. He wore a different lanyard. The paycheck had an extra line. He did not tell anyone he had accepted it. To make it easier to buy oranges for 2 households, he just did the job the way a pen writes. When someone finally finds the right paper, he saw Aaron in hallways sometimes, first in a wheelchair that rolled indignantly, then on crutches, then on legs that trembled with the stubbornness of recovery. They learned to nod at each other, then to smile, then to stand awkwardly in the same circle while other people talked, and to exit that circle at almost the same moment, as if by choreography. Eventually, they spoke the way men speak, when they refused to put unnecessary furniture in a room. "How are you?" "Better." "You?" "All right." "Thank you." "Thank you." Adesua visited Zeno's shift once. She stood in a corridor and watched him check a generator's panel with the kind of absorption she had once paid men triple salaries to pretend to have. She wanted to say, "I am sorry, and also, I'm proud, and also, I don't know how to be a person next to you anymore." She said none of it. She said, "You missed a light bulb in the conference room. Because jokes are just truth-wearing pajamas." He smiled. "I'll fix it." "Of course you will," she murmured. And if there was a tremor at the corner of her mouth, the corridor pretended not to see it. On a Sunday, she borrowed Irene's living room to sit across from Maya, who arrived with a calmness that had been purchased in decimal points over a long, expensive decade. The tea got cold between them. Apologies are events, not sentences. Adesua did not so much speak as lay down small pieces of herself across the table. Here is the part that was pride. Here is the part that was fear. Here is the part that was the kind of love that thinks it is love, and is actually possession in a silk dress. Maya listened the way one listens to the last rain of the season. Relief, yes, and also a soft annoyance at how long it took to arrive. "I won't tell you it's all right," Maya said when the table was covered. "It's not, but I need to keep the space around my life clean. Forgiveness is mopping." Adesua laughed then, a small, astonished laugh at a metaphor that dared to be better than it had any right to be. "Forgive me," she said. "I'll forgive you." Maya replied.
Not because you deserve it.
Because I do. They sat for a while longer, with 2 cups of tea that had failed at being tea. Outside, the city continued indifferent and generous. Inside, 2 women agreed, without saying it, to let a boy's life be bigger than their grief. And still, even in this fragile season of mending, nights arrived that tried to sell Zeno old stories at a discount. You are what you did. You are only what you were. You are a bruise that learned to walk. He kept receipts this time, of good days and better hours, and paid for those nights with proof. He stood on a rooftop one evening after fixing a motor that had started to complain in an unfamiliar language and watched rain move across the city like a rumor becoming fact. He put a hand on the rail and felt that he was attached to the building, in a way that did not require chains. He was still learning. They all were. But the learning had finally mercifully begun. He woke one morning to the sound of footsteps in the courtyard below. The air was damp with the kind of mist that makes old houses sigh. Zeno leaned on the window and watched a boy. No, not a boy, a man really, but still young enough to carry youth like a torch, lift a bag of files into the backseat of a car. Aaron, his son. The sight caught him in the chest like a hand that squeezes too suddenly. Zeno whispered to the glass, "That's mine." The word was not pride. It was disbelief wrapped in awe. He had seen Aaron before in hospital and hallways, but always in contexts where suffering made everything equal. To see him now in his ordinary life, upright and competent, was different. It was like watching a tree he hadn't planted grow on its own and realizing it bore fruit. That morning marked a slow shift inside him. The work was the same, checking wires, replacing bulbs, listening for machines that spoke only in rattles. But he moved through it with a small fire in his chest. Each hour he worked felt like repayment, even though the debt was impossible to balance. Each paycheck, modest as it was, went first into food for his mother, then into small envelopes of savings he told no one about. One night he walked past the portrait again. He stopped this time, daring himself to read the plaque. The light caught the name. He whispered it out loud, Maya Odeon. It felt strange in his mouth, like tasting something you once spat out and realizing it was good all along. He touched the frame lightly, almost reverently, before he carried on with his mop. Weeks turned into months. Aaron recovered enough to start running again. He was often at the gym in the building or hosting meetings that buzzed with energy. Sometimes he would pass Zeno in the hall and nod. Sometimes he would stop. "Thank you again," Aaron said once, pausing with a water bottle in his hand. "For everything." "You don't need to thank me anymore," Zeno replied. But his throat tightened because he wanted to hear it, and yet hearing it hurt. Aaron tilted his head as if studying him. "I don't know you well, but I'd like to." Zeno lowered his eyes. "In time," he said. Aaron smiled faintly. "Then we'll make time." And just like that, he left. The words stuck. For days afterward, Zeno heard them when he swept corridors. He thought about them while tightening screws on a generator panel. "We'll make time." It wasn't a promise. It was a fact waiting for him to accept it. Adeswa, his mother, saw the difference in him too. She had grown smaller in her sister's house, her voice less certain, her steps slower. But when Zeno came home each evening, sometimes with dust on his collar, sometimes with a new tiredness around his eyes, she noticed a peace that hadn't been there before. One evening she asked, "What changed you?" He paused by the door, considering whether to tell her. Then he said softly, "I work for her. For Maya and for him." Her breath caught. "And they know?" She knows. He doesn't, not yet. Adesua closed her eyes. Regret washed over her face. Regret deeper than prison walls had ever managed. "You'll tell him when the time is right," Zeno said. "When I've earned the right to." The words hung between them like an agreement. Months later, fate, or maybe something stranger, chose the moment. It wasn't planned. It came one afternoon when the fire alarm shrieked through the building. Workers spilled into the courtyard in waves of panic. Zeno stayed inside because he knew the alarms well enough to recognize the difference between drills and danger. Smoke coiled through the stairwell. He ran toward it, heart hammering. On the 10th floor, he found Aaron coughing hard, trapped behind a jammed glass door that led to a conference room. The smoke thickened fast. Aaron pounded on the glass. Zeno grabbed a chair and smashed it against the door until the pane shattered. He pulled Aaron out, shielding him as sparks showered from a ceiling light. They stumbled into the stairwell together. Outside, coughing and covered in soot, Aaron turned to him. "Why do you keep saving me?" he demanded, not angrily, but with the rawness of a man who doesn't understand his own life. Zeno stared at him. For once, he didn't lower his eyes. "Because you're my son," he said quietly. The world seemed to tilt. The smoke, the sirens, the shouts, all of it went silent for Aaron. He looked at the man before him, this janitor with tired eyes and a scar hidden beneath his shirt. He thought of the hospital bed, the kidney, the quiet humility. And suddenly pieces clicked into place. He didn't speak. Not yet, he simply stared. Then the firemen pulled them apart, guiding them into different groups. But the words had landed. Later that night, Aaron stood in his mother's office, his hands shaking. "It's him, isn't it?" he asked. "The man who saved me. The one in the hospital." "He's my father." Maya closed her eyes, long lashes trembling. For a moment she seemed younger, as if years fell away. Then she opened them and nodded slowly. "Yes, he is." Aaron sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because his shadow was too heavy," Maya whispered. "I wanted you free of it." "But he's not a shadow anymore," Aaron said, voice breaking. He's a man trying to fix what he broke. And maybe I need to know him." Maya's lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she turned to the window, hiding tears. The next day, Aaron found Zeno on the rooftop, fixing a motor. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there until Zeno noticed him. Their eyes met. "You don't have to call me son," Aaron said. "Not yet, but I'd like to know you, really know you." Zeno put down his tools. His hands trembled. For the first time in decades, he smiled without shame. And so began a slow, halting reconciliation, awkward conversations, shared meals, long silences that spoke louder than words. Maya watched from a distance, her heart torn but slowly healing. Adesua, old and frail, found some peace in knowing her son was finally becoming the man she had once denied him the chance to be. The story did not end in perfection. There were no fairy tales left for them, but there was truth and there was effort, and sometimes those two things are the beginning of redemption. And here lies the lesson. Love without discipline is destruction dressed as devotion. Parents who shield children from consequences are not protecting them. They are preparing their ruin. But discipline, truth, and accountability shape character, and character shapes destiny. So, dear viewer, ask yourself, are you loving your children enough to correct them? Or are you setting them up for change they'll never escape? If this story touched you, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to read them. And don't forget, another powerful story is coming soon. So subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thank you for watching.